One of the ways I try to stay in touch with people is occasionally to phone around and ask people. I suppose I start with the words, "How are you?" Sometimes, in fact, I manage to get to their doors. I ring on the doorbell, knock hard on the door, and then run to a safe distance. Actually, it brings back childhood memories of playing what we called Nicky Knocking Nine Doors, where you simply knocked on the door and then ran altogether. So there we are, the sins of my childhood. I'm not going to run that far, but there are interesting discussions that come up. And sometimes I'm finding people will say to me, "But how are you?" Sometimes it's people who I don't really know all that well, but I'll encounter them while I'm out for my daily exercise. And they say, "So how do you manage when you can't actually use your church to have services in it with people?" Well, of course, there are online services. There are various ways of staying in touch with people. But it can never be the same, can it, as simply gathering together. That's one of the things about being the church, is it's a social thing, that people meet together, that they meet for the sacraments, which are physical things. They use water in baptism, they use bread and wine in the Eucharist, and through them we receive the assurance of Christ's presence. We meet him in his body and his blood given for us. So how do we maintain our faith? And I am left with that question for myself, how am I doing? It's a sort of strange time at the moment. This is the last week of Eastertide. We're heading to Pentecost, Whit Sunday, this coming Sunday. And it's a time as well when I look in my diary that I see I had things written in, and quite a lot. Beginning today, Thursday, there should have been a pilgrimage which had the title The Way of Light. It was to start at Heavenfield. A battle was won by King Oswald, Saint Oswald, at Heavenfield, which helped him to establish his right to be the king and to make of Northumbria a Christian kingdom. The pilgrimage would have moved on from Heavenfield to Hexham. They were reckoning it would take 2 hours to walk from there, and then by this evening it would have reached Blanchland, another great place of pilgrimage. And tomorrow it would have gone on from Blanchland to Castleside, one of my two parishes, to the Church of St. John, where we would have hosted a service, a meeting, and put up 4 bishops, the bishops of Durham and Jarrow from our own diocese, the bishops of Newcastle and Berwick from the neighbouring diocese, all of us joined together. Of course, none of that's to be, I'm afraid, so there's a sadness there. We'll hopefully be able to reschedule the pilgrimage to another time, but realistically we know that will be another year. Pilgrimage is something that talks about a journey where we seek to become more aware of God's presence with us as we travel. Are we aware of that? Well, no change of gear for me with the pilgrimage this year. There's inevitably annually a change of gear when we reach Pentecost and go into what we call ordinary time. We mark ordinary time simply by seeking to set a rhythm, but in the midst of things which are the ordinary stuff of life, and that we all need to be able to do. Perhaps there will be further changes next week, with changes, for example, in restrictions due to COVID-19, things starting to open up in our country, things that we weren't allowed to do before, meetings that we maybe couldn't have with other people. We don't know. We need to see how that works out. We need patience, I think. I hope that people won't go daft and think, well, we can just do whatever we want. Things are not going to go back to the way that they were. So patience required of us all. Inevitably in our churches there are going to continue to be restrictions. However much they may open up, it won't be for anything more than private prayer. And even that's going to be difficult to think, how do we do that? How do we keep people conscious of the need for hygiene when they come into church, to wash their hands, to gel themselves? How do we sanitize surfaces and all the rest? Only further into the future will we be able to look at the usual menu of services which we've had, to return to administering the sacraments to everybody who may join us. It's a difficult thing to work out. I find myself wondering, well, how am I going to use these next few days? Time that would have been filled in the diary. Well, sometimes it's just to say, well, how I can't use them, so I'll do something else with them. Maybe take time out, maybe open a book and get some way into it. I hope that I can do a bit more of that. I've got the books that are left with me, and so often are unopened. I have been doing a bit of reading this morning, and I was reading particularly about the relationship of the great novelist Graham Greene with a Spanish priest, Leopoldo Duran. They formed this friendship with each other and would find themselves taking holidays together, travelling around. And it was to become the inspiration of Graham Greene's novel, Monsignor Quixote, which I read quite a long time ago and maybe should read again. A story of two people, obviously based on Don Quixote himself and his sidekick Sancho Panza, but with the priest, Monsignor Quixote, who becomes a Monsignor by accident, travelling around with a communist mayor, seeing where that takes them. Graham Greene himself remembered how he had a conversation with Leopoldo Duran, and asked him about the source of his faith. And Father Duran said to him, "I do not believe in God, I touch him." I've been thinking about that and what that means. This is a time when we can't be touching. I had a meeting, in fact, online with two other clergy and a group of students who are in training to be ordained at the moment. A couple of them should be ordained at Petertide, but it's not going to happen at the end of June or beginning of July. They're not really quite sure where they're going to be living. I asked them where they are at the moment, and it ranged from people who are still in a student room in Durham to another who'd gone back to his childhood bedroom in Sheffield. I was inspired by them as they still looked to the future, hopefully. As they were clocking off from our meeting at the end, they were going to say Compline one with another, whereas I know that the clergy already had either opened a wine bottle or were looking forward to a glass of gin at the end. Well, there we are, we can be inspired by that. I was glad to have conversations too with my fellow clergy. Each of us lives on our own, and each of us was to say, I haven't actually been anywhere near anyone, closer than 2 meters, haven't touched anybody for the last 10 weeks it is now, isn't it? So what do we make of Father Duran, who says, I do not believe in God, I touch him? I hope actually what it is to say is that actually God is reaching out to touch us. For clergy at least, there is the privilege of being able to continue to celebrate the sacraments, though on our own, and there God touches us. We had a discussion last night as to what it means for the people of our parishes who can't receive Holy Communion at the moment, that they are having to live without the sacraments. And yet I found myself saying, in a way, they're not. The sacraments which the clergy are celebrating on their own are celebrated for the whole of their parishes, their whole communities. It's to say, as we take bread and wine, as we recognize them to be for us the body and the blood of Christ, that here Christ's body is broken and it's given for us to be the body of Christ wherever we may be, however distant we may be from one another. It's to declare Christ is present in our communities. That we recognize in the celebration of the sacraments. We recognize in our ongoing prayer. How are you managing? People are saying to me. And yes, it's not really a straightforward journey. I can't just be entirely cheerful about everything. What I can say, though, is that there is a rhythm given to me by the prayer in which I'm expected to engage as a priest, morning, and evening prayer. Other times for prayer as well, which are there, prayer during the day, and Compline, night prayer. They're there for everybody. You can find those forms of prayer on the Church of England's website. Just put in daily prayer and it will take you there. You can find apps which will actually give you the forms of prayer to use at that particular time of day, either by downloading the daily prayer app or the time to pray app. You can find them on the Google Store and the iPhone Store as well, or Apple Store, whatever it's called. I was going to continue now with midday prayer, but it's probably going to be too long if I do that, so I'm going to stop now, but I'll record it separately. I wish you all well in the days which are to come. Maybe there will be a change of gear in what we can do, at least in being able to meet with another household, though at a safe distance. I think that's coming on. But we need to recognise as well the call to responsibility at tracing and tracking. I think that the government has more to produce on that, but we all need to take it on board if we're to be safe. Let's recognise why we can't touch one another beyond the household. Nevertheless, God is reaching to touch us. God bless you.